All right, so I think a really good one to touch on, again, sort of as we move towards summer and a lot of people dieting, is the idea of cheat meals. There's quite a lot to unpack on this one, but in short, Ben and I are not fond of, certainly not fond of the language, arguably not really fond of sort of any of the applications of sort of these more sort of off-plan,
Supposed application.
yeah, of these sort of off-plan meals in general. Um, there's certainly I've found ways which these kind of styles of meals can be appropriate for sort of improving relationship with food, but I think on the whole, the way that they are used, and Ben will agree with me, is extremely detrimental. Potentially to sort of relationship with food, particularly with potentially clients who are quite delicate in their relationship with food already, and the benefits on a physiological level are also uh, exaggerated at the very least, or often flat out wrong. I think a good one to probably kick off with is probably sort of the physiological side of things, because there isn't quite so much to kind of touch on there. And I know Ben will then probably want to go off on one about sort of the relationship with food side of things. So I'll continue my ramblings for a bit. And obviously, I think a very popular opinion of cheat meals is, they can be used sort of spike your metabolism again and improve, help you lose weight and stuff. And while there's a lot more to unpack here than what might first kind of appear. I think for starters, it's worth noting that sort of all your hormones and metabolism and stuff generally take a decently prolonged period of time, at least weeks of a certain food intake for your body to really start regulating itself around that sort of food intake again. So it's not like one day of higher calories is going to really have any sort of impact on your metabolism or hormones or something. Potentially when we're kind of looking at like hunger hormones and stuff like that, yeah, a tiny amount, but on the whole, when we're looking at kind of improvements on hormones and metabolism, really nothing to be gained from cheat meals, because again, your body needs much longer than that to adapt to these type of things. So immediately, that's one that's just straight up false when we're looking at physiology. Another popular one is I lost weight, after a cheat meal, but this one's very, very simple to kind of disprove immediately. Cheat meals are usually much more calorie dense, which means the volume of food that you're eating is going to be a lot less, which just it means that the amount of food in your body is going to be a lot less. So that immediately is probably going to have a bit of an impact on scale weight. Can potentially, be a bit of a stress management thing, and can potentially lower stress, potentially therefore potentially helps shift a bit of water weight, which again, scale weight may drop a bit as a result. But is that having any sort of impact on fat loss? No, not really. I think those are sort of the main things on physiology sort of ticked off and out the way. So if you hear anyone tell you that cheat meals work in any of those ways in regards to physiology, then they're flat out wrong.
Yeah, well, okay, let's get into the physiology of why, because you touched on it, why some people wake up lighter. So basically, as you said, it can be just less food weight because you're eating something that's more calorie dense and therefore less, volume. From a stress management point of view, is one meal going to do anything? Probably not. So that's really actually probably not going to do anything. But from a water perspective, let's get into the physiology of it. Yes, obviously, if you're eating something that's more calorie dense, you're going to spike insulin a bit more, and insulin does then have effects on aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone, which basically affect the levels of sodium to water within the body. So yes, you can drop some water weight when you have that bigger spike within insulin. Again, to what degree? Probably not that much, but that is mainly if you wake up later. That's mainly why you get nothing to do with fat loss whatsoever. But yeah, cheat meals are dumb. That's it. They're dumb. That could be the Fitbit over and done with. But no, we do need to obviously get into the relationship with food side of things. Again, from a physiological standpoint, they do pretty much nothing. So why people implement them in the way they're trying to implement them, I do not know. Because first of all, the language is just awful. It's not a cheat meal. What are you cheating on? What are you supposedly cheating on? It's food, for God's sakes. Like it's really that simple. It's food. There's nothing to cheat on, right? And then some people say, well, it's okay. It's not a cheat. It's a treat. It's not a treat. You're not a dog. You don't need a reward. It's food. It's something that you just eat. Well, people then go, well, all right, it's an off meal plan. If by saying, I get that's better, but by saying something that's off or on, what does this do to mindset? It creates this 100% on nothing mindset. So using these words is just, it's not, you might not think it has a big impact, but it really does. It has a massive impact on your perspective, on your outlook, and then how that has, that's impact on your relationship with food, your relationship with yourself, and then actually long-term or longer term, how it's going to affect things like results, and then possible things that could stem from that, such as potential restrict binge cycles. Because again, if you think you're cheating on something, if you think it's a treat, so you don't think you deserve it, you're more likely to restrict. What's going to happen? Well, again, that mindset isn't going to last forever. So eventually when you do break, more likely to binge. So, you can start to see how straight away just using the wrong words can set your mindset up to be in the wrong place, which is incredibly important. And again, typically, in fact, not even typically, I think 100% of the time, if you have a bad relationship with food, you have a bad relationship with yourself. Again, in terms of quality of life, and then disorders such as anxiety and depression are more likely to be apparent or more likely to occur, I should say. So you can see how these lots of simple problems start to stem because people like to push this word cheat meal out, and it's just absolute nonsense. It's a meal, okay? If you want to eat some pizza or a burger, just eat some pizza or a burger. Like, that's it. Eat it, move on, and don't even think about it more. Or if you do think about it, think, that was really nice. That's it. And then just move on with your life. Just carry on as normal. Just go back to what you were doing. Like it's as simple as that. That's even if you're in a fat loss phase. Now, if you were in, say, something like a prep where things need a bit more on point, so to speak. Again, sometimes we'll use these words just because it's the best fitting word to get the point across, not necessarily, even if it's not necessarily the right word, but more so on point in a prep. It might differ a little bit because you might need to make sure, your calories are a bit more controlled, and so on and so forth. Because again, if you these meals such as burger and pizza are obviously more calorie dense, so it's going to be harder to control calorie intake that way. But also, if you do manage, it's also going to have more negative impacts on hunger because again, these meals are what's the word where you want more after? I'm not looking for the word moreish, by the way. I mean, they are moreish,
like a trigger food type thing.
Yeah, it's not. What is the word I'm looking for? That's bugging me as well.
You're on a roll today.
Yeah, I know. Like we just recorded a podcast before, and there's a movie. If we're talking about movies, there's a movie I forgot. But yeah, basically, let's just use the word moreish. That they are moreish, right? So it can be harder to control appetite and hunger when you eat these foods. So again, in a prep, maybe you have to be a bit more. Maybe it's a bit harder to eat it and just move on for those reasons. But in every day, and to be fair though, it doesn't mean you can't eat those foods in prep, because again, it's in a prep, it's still the carries in, carries out. It's as simple as that. But understanding how they will impact hunger and just controlling overall calorie intake is going to be harder eating those foods. That's just understanding that's important. But if you're Gen Pop, even in a fat loss phase, eat the food, enjoy it, move on. Don't label it anything. Eat it, enjoy it, move on. If you fancy it, have it. And again, sometimes it's just knowing that you can have it makes you less likely to have it. But if you're using this word cheat or treat, then your perspective is, I can't have this. Or I can have it, but only when I deserve it. And that's just nonsense. So again, those words and how that affects your mindset affects everything else. So, we pretty much established very easily that from a physiological point of view, it does nothing. But it doesn't stop there, because from a psychological point of view, it can do everything. It can change a lot. So again, if you have these meals, you're not cheating on anything. You're not treating yourself. You're just enjoying food the same way you enjoy any other piece of food. and that's it. It just needs to be like as simple as that. And again, when you start to gain that perspective, and you just enjoy it, you don't feel guilty. You start to, and then what happens from that is you start to realize that quality of life goes up. But again, just from purely from the enjoyment of diet, quality of life will go up, and it will make it easier to adhere to the diet. But from a social point of view, it will make life so much easier because then you don't have to worry so much about going out to eat. Great, you went out to eat one day. Fantastic. You had a good time. You had a good social life. It's not going to make or break your results.
Yeah.
So you enjoy it. You move on. Again, as you kind of said earlier, like, one day of we're going to overeat from time to time. One day of overeating isn't going to do anything at all, like at all. So again, understanding that these things don't make or break your results is also really important to just to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. I think there's a good amount to sort of unpack there. For start, I like kind of where you went with sort of the whole, one day of eating. You really don't have to worry about it. But that's unfortunately one of the kind of logics that people use for cheat meals, because they say, well, cheat meal's good because one, it's not going to harm your progress at all. So include like your weekly cheat meal and stuff. But again, that's a very sort of two-dimensional point of view, because we come back to sort of that idea of the psychology behind these sort of choices in language, potentially the timing of these meals. I know we've obviously sort of conversed before about sort of how kind of gets people into the habit of just allowing these things like on the weekend, for instance, and the habits that can start to form. So there's a lot to touch on in regards to how we may first see these concepts versus if we dig a bit deeper. There's a lot more to really unpack there. On the note of those sort of two-dimensional thoughts, I think a good way to kind of just sum up what Ben and I are really of the opinion of is, people really fall into these kind of two camps where some people, have this really 2D thought of, well, cheat meals are generally more enjoyable food. Cheat meals will therefore help people stick to diets. Very good. Let's have cheat meals, but it's not going to harm your progress. Whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, people fall into this other camp where a lot of people just straight up, go down the rabbit hole of, no, cheat meals will interrupt your progress. You don't want it bad enough if you want cheat meals. I say cheat meals 100% do harm, just not in the way that you think, because they're not going to harm your body comp progress. But they probably are going to screw up your relationship with food, especially if your relationship with yourself and food is a bit more delicate as it is. I know there was probably stuff that you wanted to kind of touch on in regards to sort of the timing things and weekends. So I think what I'll quickly add on to that before handing it back to you is, I'd go as far as to say, not even just one, one period of time off eating exactly, super meticulously and stuff, and eating, very nutrient dense foods and, more quote unquote good foods, while that isn't going to make a difference to your progress. One thing which I think people could be even more relaxed on is, 2-3 days of more relaxed, for lack of a better word, eating probably isn't going to damage your progress either. The timing aspect, when we're looking at, just allowing things on the weekends, I don't think there'd be any problem with, enjoying yourself, 2-3 days in a row. Because for starters, most of it does come back to the basic ideas of energy balance. And again, as we sort of touched on earlier, it takes a bit more time for your body to really start regulating itself around your food intake anyway.
Yeah. What is interesting, though, to be fair, is that in overfeeding studies, it shows how there's a lot of individuality when people overfeed, but this is for prolonged periods of time. This is for like weeks.
It also depends on the amount of overfeeding, because again, if you're going a few hundred calories, for a couple of days, probably isn't going to cause a great deal of weight gain, especially if other things are accounted for.
Chances are, if you overeat for a couple of days, like it'll do literally nothing. If you overeat for a couple of weeks, again, it's very individual. Some people will gain fat, but some people will just adapt to it very quickly, and that'll be a new maintenance. Like, it's very, very individual. It's actually quite fascinating to look at. But yeah, that's a little bit of a sidetrack. So yes, restriction comes in many forms. People think restriction is just this plain black and white thing. Well, like you said, you might just say view certain foods as something you can have while dieting, some foods you can't. That's obviously, when I say restriction, most people think that is restriction, but obviously restriction comes in many forms. One of them is what I've just mentioned. Another is obviously calorie restriction itself obviously is a form of restriction. So if you have a poor relationship with food, calorie restriction is not a good idea. Not at least whilst you still have a poor relationship with food. Mm-hmm. But another restriction is, as you touched on, and I quite like how you knew that's exactly what I wanted to touch on. I was thinking about was the viewing certain foods as a quote unquote weekend food. So if you're someone who views pizza or burgers or whatever you like to enjoy as something you can only eat on the weekend, that is a form of restriction. Because if you're not eating it, if you think you can't have it throughout the week and you can only have it on the weekend, and you view it as a weekend food, again, by the time you get to the weekend, because you've restricted something that, it's a Wednesday and you might want it, but you go, oh, well, it's a Wednesday. I'll wait till Friday night to have my pizza. Because by the time you get to the Friday, you've restricted, chances are you're going to want to have more of that food, mm-hmm. and you are more likely to overeat on that food. So again, understanding that, you can have any food any day of the week is actually, again, is important for your mindset. And again, clear line, do not straw man our argument here. The clear line is we're saying you can, not have to. You can have these foods anytime you want. You don't have to have these foods anytime you want. And again, I refer back to what I said earlier. Sometimes it's enough just knowing that you can have it, because it actually makes you more likely, or it makes you less likely to actually have it. So sometimes, again, it's just the mindset. So, you've heard the whole thing of like, you want what you can't have. Well, it still applies to food as well. So just knowing you can have it is enough sometimes. So again, you might say, well, I have a good, as I said, you might say, well, I've got a good relationship with food. I include pizza and burgers in my diet when I want it. But then you go, okay, when do you typically have it? Oh, I'll typically have it on a Saturday night. It's like, well, do you sometimes want it throughout the week? Well, yeah, but I'll just wait till the Saturday. Well, your relationship with food isn't as good as you think, because you are still restricting and depriving yourself of something that you want when you want it. So again, but that's understanding that, it's not always going to be conducive to your goals as well. So, occasionally, again, this is why we're saying you don't have to have something. You might go, all right, it's Wednesday, I want some pizza, but maybe that's not conducive to your goals in that current moment. Maybe it's best that you don't have the pizza. Now, again, this is where we have to go really individual, and we walk a tricky line, because, it's still the case of, if you were to have that pizza and it wasn't conducive to your goals, it still would make a difference long term to reaching your goal, really. But if your goal is very, very specific with a certain deadline, and this is where I talk about the difference again between, say, prep and just Gen Pop, then maybe you have to go, okay, I want some pizza, but it's not best. Maybe I should try some other things, like, journaling in circumstances like that's quite good. Because then you can start to understand why you want it. Again, this gets a bit down a rabbit hole, but you might understand why you want that pizza more so than actually wanting that pizza. So you might understand that actually it's just boredom, or maybe you start to pick apart the fact that another form of restriction is that you try to save calories for the nighttime, but because you're restricting throughout the day, you get more hungry. And again, therefore, when you're hungry, cravings go up, and you start to understand that. So it's not really that you ever wanted the pizza. It's just that you were restricting in some form without maybe realizing. So again, in those circumstances, maybe journaling and starting to understand and appreciate your own thoughts more is going to be a useful tool, because if it's not conducive to your goals right now, but you want it, and yet you want it not because you actually want it, but you want it for another reason, that's where that can become useful to do. If all that made sense. So yeah, just again, that's getting a little bit down the rabbit hole, and again, it becomes very individual. And again, understanding that realistically, even if you had a pizza when you didn't really want the pizza, it was for another reason, deep psychological reason or whatever, it's still not going to harm goals in the long run. Again, there's a lot that could be said, but the more that could be said, the more it starts to apply to an individual level. Because we're talking to a generic group of people, we can't go that much down the rabbit hole. this is the type of things we now be working with individual clients, and more so starting to help them understand their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own relationship with food, and their own relationship with themselves a lot more. Yeah,
for sure. I think that's actually a perfect spot to wrap it up. As you said, you know, after this point, it does get very, very much so more individual. But I think that kind of encompasses sort of a lot of the reasons why, you know, we aren't particularly fond of cheat meals, you know, particularly as a language, very much so still as a broader concept in general. And yeah, make sure if you enjoyed this, be sure to share it with someone who's dieting this summer and whose PT told them to have a weekly cheat meal. And if that's the case, probably get yourself a new PT. But yeah, no, nice one. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one.
In the next one.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more.
If you enjoyed that episode, be sure to check out the latest Fitbit here and the latest podcast here. Thanks for watching, guys and girls.